Okay, so welcome to this economics revision for IB and A-level with me, Mr. Mac. Today we're going to be looking at globalisation. So what is it? Well, the definition that you need to know is globalisation is a process of deeper economic integration between countries and regions of the world. Examples of this could be the EU, because of their greater interconnectedness between countries within the trading bloc. Multinational corporations invest all over the world these days, examples being Starbucks or McDonald's. I always use the example of walking out of Tokyo Narita Airport in Japan, looking forward to some sushi and going out for some nice nights out in Tokyo eating Japanese food, but as you walk out of the airport, there is a McDonald's straight in front of you. There was a McDonald's in Afghanistan in Camp Bastion, and so they get all over the world, and this is greater interconnectedness, it's Americanization of different cultures, which has its positives and its negatives. The rise of the UN, the United Nations, that is countries coming together to work together for the greater good. And then a technology there of the internet. The invention of the internet has led to greater interconnectedness of countries and better communications networks, enabling international trade and the rise of globalization. So what has caused globalization? It's really important in your exams to be able to explain the causes of globalization and the effects on people and stakeholders of globalization. Well, improved transport. If you rewind to sort of my grandfather's era, right back in the sort of 1920s and 30s, to get to Australia, you had to go by boat, and it took you months to get there. Whereas throughout the 1950s and 60s, after the Second World War, you saw much better transport, much more efficient in terms of fuel, but also the invention of passenger aeroplanes and cargo aeroplanes being able to move products around the world more quickly. When you buy things from China from factories, you have the option to pay for shipping, which will take about a month to get from China to the UK, or now you can buy air freight and buy your products via air freight, which takes typically about 3 to 4 days. So it can be very fast, but it's much more expensive when you're importing products. So improved transport links are a very key one. And linked to that is containerization. This was the invention of the container ship, which we'll look at on the next slide in more detail. New technology, so the rise of internet and emails. I can remember when I was a pupil here at this school that my old technology teacher sent an email in the 1990s for the first time to America, and we were amazed when straight away an email came back from America within a minute. And this new technology has led to much better links with other nations, because you can now trade and send messages to people and they'll reply instantly, whereas before it would be letters and telegrams moving around the world very slowly. You've got the growth of multinational corporations, so McDonald's, Nike, Starbucks, these major brands that we know and love, have moved around the world investing, seeking greater profits. Now that comes with benefits and costs, which we can talk about in the future on another slide. But they are now all over the world, and they've provided things like employment, they've provided things like management expertise to developing countries, which has benefited those developing nations. You've got the growth of global trading blocs, so the EU being a great example. And on top of that, you've got NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. So global trading blocs are countries coming together to reduce barriers to trade, which is that next bullet point on the list. So a tariff is a tax on imports, which looks to protect domestic industry and domestic employment from outside competition. And we'll have a slide show later in the day and later in the course when we're looking at our revision showing the impacts of those. But removing those barriers to trade will lead to greater global trade and hence benefit countries worldwide, and it's led to globalization. You've got growth of global media. These days it's so easy to access Fox News, CNN, Russia Today, Al Jazeera News, all of these international news organizations which 40, 50 years ago you wouldn't have had access to. And this has led to us understanding countries better and understanding people from different countries better, and therefore better international relations and globalization. We've got the global trade cycle. All the countries have been much more closely interconnected. We saw in the financial crisis of 2007 how interconnected countries were, because it wasn't just one country that suffered from that massive subprime mortgage crisis. It was actually most of the Western world. if China changes its decisions that by 1 or 2%, that is a huge knock-on effect on the rest of the world. Their population is so large that if they see a recession, that's going to have knock-on effects on people that they trade with and buy products from, because they will buy much less. So this global trade cycle is much more interconnected. You've got financial integration of countries. Being able to make payments worldwide has improved significantly. I can send money on Western Union from my phone to Pakistan when I buy hockey sticks within my hockey stick business, and that can be picked up within half an hour. So you can send money to another country very easily these days, and the rise of sort of internet banking, as we know, checks are on the way out, and it's all becoming digitized. And then you've got improved mobility of capital, and that includes labour in that. So it's easy for a company to unbolt a robot from a factory floor in the UK if they wanted to after Brexit, and move it to a country within the EU and start a factory there if they'd like to. It's easier for people to move around the world and work in different countries. So within the EU, you have the Schengen zone. Workers can move around and work in different countries, and this has led to benefits, but also costs, which we can talk about in the future. So just to quickly focus on containerization. Containerization is the system of standardized transport that uses a common size of steel container to transport goods. And as I said earlier, it was introduced in 1956. That's when it was invented. It was a much cheaper and efficient mode of transport for goods worldwide, which back before the container ship, goods would be put in bulk in the hold of ships, and you wouldn't be able to fit as much different products within a ship. But you can see from that photo there how it can all come together like a Lego, sort of Lego blocks fitting together, much more efficient use of space, and it's very cheap. You can hire a container for a couple of £1,000s to ship things from one country to another. And so this has helped multinational corporations sell their products world over. You now have Ford vehicles from America actually being manufactured in South Africa, where they have specialist factories, and then shipped around the world from South Africa, having had the parts shipped from America to South Africa on container ships. It's led to countries being able to specialise in trade, and thus this is a much better global allocation of resources, and Adam Smith and Ricardo would have been very happy about this. So the impacts of globalisation here, the stakeholder effects, who does it affect? And this is important evaluation. So consumers within the developed world get more choice and they get cheaper products. This is a really good benefit of globalisation. We can choose products from all over the world, and it's led to rising standard of living. Producers in developed countries can source their parts cheaper from elsewhere in the world. We can get parts made in China and then put them together in the UK or Germany or France, put them together and make a final product from those cheaper parts. So our developed countries' producers gain, but they also have a larger market to sell to. They can now sell world over because of globalisation. You've got producers in developing countries, they gain access to world markets. They can now sell much more of their products. They gain. They also end up with multinational corporations investing into developing countries, and they will bring with them management expertise. And it's just important to realise that with that multinational corporation coming in, that might drive smaller producers out in those developing nations. But also, there's a positive for local producers within those countries, because multinational corporations may source their inputs locally. So important to think about that as well. Balance your argument on that. The workforce in the developed country will come under pressure. And that's because structural unemployment may occur. We've seen the death of manufacturing within the UK. We're much more service-based now. And so structural unemployment could occur in the developed country because manufacturing moves overseas to cheaper countries. The workforce in the developing country, they will see rising employment due to foreign direct investment by multinational corporations, but the sort of counter-argument to that is maybe those MNCs will exploit the workforce because there won't be the labour laws and there won't be the health and safety laws actually protecting the workers in those countries. The environment is a big loser in all of this, unfortunately. So the transport of goods around the world does burn fossil fuels, as we'd know, but also my example here is the production of meat and soya for things like tofu in Brazil. They cut down the rainforest to grow grass for cattle or to grow soya, and so this deforestation is happening because of selling to world markets. If Brazil was just growing food for itself, then actually it wouldn't probably be carrying out anywhere near as much deforestation. Whereas because it's selling meat and soya world over, then this is a big problem for Brazil, the deforestation that has occurred. Developing countries have lower environmental protection laws as well. And so are we actually, here's a rhetorical question here, are we in the developed world outsourcing our environmental destruction? It's something to think about, because if we buy a t-shirt made in Bangladesh, they've just pumped, because they don't have the ETP treatment plants for treating water before it's pumped into river systems, they just dump the dyes into the river system. It kills the fish. It means that water is no longer drinkable for the local population. And so are we outsourcing that environmental problem? Because in the UK that would never happen with our very strict laws. Global inequality, impact of globalisation on that is that actually developing countries have seen some very fast economic growth because of this access to world markets. So that's helped reduce inequality on a global scale, but within those developing nations there is still huge amounts of poverty and inequality because actually the factors of production aren't equally distributed within those countries, and so important to sort of balance your argument on that one as well, because we know that workforces get exploited in the developing nations.